Hello, my name is Opal Singleton. I am the president and CEO of Million Kids. I hope you will follow us on social media and also be sure and go in and sign up for Million Kids Insider Alerts. That is what this is. We're sending them out to the general public right now, but in the future, it'll be subscription only. You won't have to pay for it, but we'll ask you to please go to millionkids.org and sign up to receive these. So this particular one is really kind of some breaking news about a sentencing. But the goal of this series of training, and this is the third one of these that you've received over the past week and a half, the goal is to educate you on the variations of the kinds of gang sex trafficking rings. Sometimes we have kind of a tunnel vision and we think of gang trafficking as all alike, but there are many different kinds of gang trafficking. We recently, in the past few days, shared with you about a large-scale gang sex trafficking ring from Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. It was, in that case, the Bloods, and it had to do with a pimp here on your left that he called himself Magnificent. And also it was ran by two females. Now, this is important to understand because we think of the female as the victim in sex trafficking. And most of the time they are, but there are female pimps and they're often more violent than even the male pimp. And that was the case in this Bloods trafficking ring. In that case, they covered multiple states. It is organized crime. This is all about money laundering and getting money back to the top of the gang leadership that is there. They made at least $7 million through forced prostitution. They operated out of upscale mansions in Dallas-Fort Worth. Now, I want you to take note of that because some gangs actually operate out of the no-tell motel on the edge of town. Other gangs will operate out of some of the more luxurious of homes or hotels. And that's what the first gang did out of Dallas, Texas. They had at least 20 victims. They were adult females. We believe they may have as many as 100 victims. Those victims were horribly, horribly violated. They had a $1,000 a night quota and they could not come in until they made that much money. They couldn't sleep. And out of that $1,000, they only got to keep $10 for food. The rest of it went to that gang. This is organized criminal enterprises. They were beaten, they were kicked, they were slapped, they were threatened with death. Now then, after that, we reviewed a case of one pimp who had one girl, and they were also a Bloods member out of Virginia. In this case, they were sentenced, and as they got in there, what they found was that there, at this time, no other Bloods members were arrested. So you can have a case where you have a large-scale ring, but you can all have a case where it's only one individual member. In this case, that particular female was horribly abused. They were coerced. They were forced into prostitution. He kicked her. He beat her. He slapped her. He beat her with a belt, and he drugged her. And he threatened her family and her with death. He kept all of that money. Well, I'm happy to announce a new sentencing out of a different kind of gang case. Those of you that have followed me and heard my presentations on gang trafficking or maybe the advanced sex trafficking, I've talked about the Tillicum gang case and Holt, who is the gentleman that left this. He actually wasn't Jen Holt at all, just let's say the violent male that ran this. This is called the Tillicum Park Gangsters, and they are part of the Black Gangster Disciple gang out of Washington. The leader was incarcerated. He was doing this from prison. Now, I've done a lot of research on Holt. I'm going to tell you I can't print what I'd like to print so that you can see this man has no soul. This is one of the most depraved human beings that I've ever seen, just based on his own words, which I cannot put into print. But he was a gang leader, and he was a pimp who was operating from prison. He just got another additional 30-year sentence in prison. Now, you say to yourself, if you get them to prison and they're still operating, there's something wrong with the system. Yeah, there is. But one of the things that I want to share with you is This did not go unnoticed. This started way back in 2017, and he was serving time in a jail. During some of the cell calls that he made, officers were listening in, and that happens. They listen to jail calls. In fact, they announce to the caller that they're listening in, but these guys, think they're going to be exceptional and get away with it. As they discussed many of the things that were going on, what he seemed to be doing was coordinating ongoing prostitution activity, because what they heard, they took a copy of the calls and they turned it in to the task force. And so I want to give recognition here to the South Sound Child Exploitation Task Force and also the South Sound Gang Task Force. They got a hold of this. They started the investigations. These kinds of investigations take a long time because it's just not one individual. You're having to track down entire gangs who are operating in multiple counties with multiple victims. They move the victims around. You have to penetrate the gang and be able to get the information that you need to justify a search warrant so that you can build a case. Holt was well known to law enforcement for a long time. He was the proclaimed leader of the Tillicum Park Gangsters street gang. He was heard saying, "I don't treat them," meaning the women, "like nothing but the blank on the bottom of my shoe." Now, this is the best one that I can put on for you. There are many other things that he thought and put in sound and writing, and a very depraved individual. And so I can't print it, but I want you to understand this guy, as far as I can tell, had no soul. He and fellow gang members were accused of raping and prostituting 15 victims. One of those victims was only 13 years old. Can you imagine being a 13-year-old girl controlled by a violent gang put out for forced prostitution? He was running this from the cell, and he used extreme violence, and including with other gang members, to control the gang and also to inflict the violence on the young victims. He moved the girls all around from Tacoma, Lakewood, Lacey, Olympic, and Bellingham. So it's a large area and multi-different kinds of law enforcement that are investigating this. He ordered the rape of young girls. He prostituted out young girls. He threatened to kill mothers and their babies. He trained little boys how to be gang members using phone transcripts, social media. He was using a lot of Facebook Messenger and some Instagram out there, and also Backpage. So looking at all of this, the police were able to estimate that he and other gang members had victimized a minimum of 15 young girls. Holt was sentenced to another 30 years in prison. He pled guilty to first-degree conspiracy to commit human trafficking, 2 counts of second-degree human trafficking, promoting commercial sex abuse of a minor, and there are 9 other people that have been charged in connection with this sex trafficking ring. So he paid for the motel rooms, arranged the sex ads. At that time, it was on Backpage, assisted in the collecting of money, and ordered the collecting of money, all from his jailhouse room or cell, as it turned out. Holt was often referred to himself by the name of Boo, or Get Money, and he refers to himself as God or the Tillicum Park God. So this man is extremely vile. Now, there was another sentence that was quite long. In this case, they believe got another 31 and a half years in prison. This is for Clayton Tyrone King. He was known as YG. He was charged with first-degree conspiracy to commit human trafficking and second-degree human trafficking. As they were saying when they sentenced him, because the defendant committed such egregious acts and destroyed so many lives, the state is asking for this very long sentence. A note in the file says that on King's behalf, he says he is still innocent. others that were charged. And I want you to see the ages of some of these people. You're talking somewhere between 23 and 32. I point that out because they often use these younger guys, these younger gang guys, to recruit girls on dating sites and hookup sites. And they might be 14, 15, and this guy's 23. And they think, wow, I've really met somebody that's going to change my life. And they do change their life, but not for the better. All of these guys had what we call monikers: Slim, B1, AK, Q in these cases. So there's another one that they called Baby Boo that was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He pled guilty, so he copped a plea, as they say. Some of the charges were dismissed against some of the other suspects because they pled guilty to lesser charges ranging from 1 year and 5 months to 7 months in prison. Now, this is the end of these three, what I call kind of a juxtaposition, a comparison on them. So I want to just step back a minute for you in your education, if you will. I want to give you some takeaways on this. Gangs, including the Bloods and the Black Gangster Disciples, are often engaged in human trafficking. It is the way they make money. You know, gangs are often making more money selling people than they do selling drugs. And that is because if you sell drugs, you have to go get more drugs, but you can sell people over and over and over a night. Gang trafficking is very violent and very dangerous. If you think you are seeing a case of gang trafficking, do not get personally involved. If you see somebody in trouble, call 911. If you see something that needs to be reported and investigated, I'm going to give you a way to do it. But be careful. Don't go racing in there saying that you're going to fix it. These guys play for keeps, and I want to remind you of that. When you see what they did to their victims, you want to make sure that you keep yourself safe as you're getting ready to report it. Gang trafficking cases can be isolated incidences or part of a large-scale organization across the nation. Some gangs exploit females that are adults, and some gangs prey on minors. Occasionally, you'll have a mix of them, but usually you'll have a focus on one or the other. Victims of gang trafficking are some of the most exploited victims of crime that I have ever met, and they need long-term professional intervention. Some gangs exploit adult females, and some of them will prey on minors. And it depends on the situation, the kind of aftercare they need. They for sure are going to need legal assistance. That is a given, because some of them have been arrested, and the pimps will use that to keep them enslaved, believing that they're going to get charged, especially if they're an adult. But most law enforcement today are anxious to work with the victims, help them be treated as victims, and get them services. If it's a very young girl, especially if she's just coming out of puberty, this girl is going to have PTSD in the worst way. She's going to be panicked. She'll be afraid for what's happening for her family, especially if she is a foreign national victim. Gangs use varying kinds of violence, abuse, physical harm, burning, scratching, ligature marks. Watch for strangulation marks, damage to the knees, cigarette burns, all of those kinds of things, as well as psychological manipulation and threats of death, not only just to them, but to their families. And that is very common. If you hear someone say, I can't get out, they're going to hurt my family, do not just slough that off. Believe them, because it is very real and they can. So even though gang members are confined to prison, they are often using contraband communication devices to continue their illegal operations. So you say to yourself, well, what good is another 30 years? Well, the upside of that is, even though he was trying to operate the gang from prison, it is an isolated area where law enforcement can listen in on their calls. And that is one way that it's effective, to find out who else is out there. Because just because you get one of these people doesn't mean the gang stops. And that gives you an advantage to doing that. So it is worth it to continue on going after these people. If you see someone in trouble, be sure to call 911. But this is the National Reporting Hotline. This is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. You can report anonymously. If you have some information, feel free to do that, whether it's sex trafficking, labor trafficking, sextortion, which is blackmail with a photo, social media exploitation, or child pornography. All of it can be reported at 1-888-3737-888. I want to thank you for listening to our Insider Alerts. If you haven't signed up, please go on and do that and share them with everyone you know. We want to educate you so that the world can be effective at stopping this, protecting the victims, and taking down the bad guy. Thank you to each and every one of you that support the work of Million Kids in your prayers and support us financially. If you want to do that, I appreciate you. Please go to millionkids.org. You can hit that donate button. You can text it in, or if you're old-fashioned, you can send in a check at the P.O. box on there. But we appreciate you supporting our work financially. We cannot do this work without you, and this work takes resources. If you want to reach me, you can at opal, O-P-A-L, at millionkids.org. I am not 911. I am very busy, so it may take me a little bit to get back to you, but I'll do my best. But that is how you can reach me. So thank you for following Insider Alerts. I hope you share them with others so that we can educate as many people as possible. And we'll see you next time on Million Kids Insider Alerts.